Based off the books, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire was one of the earliest Nintendo 64 games, and follows the exploits of Dash Rendar, a smuggler similar to Han Solo. I remember renting this game back in the day and not thinking too highly of it. I just didn't quite understand exactly what the game was trying to be. It seemed like a cluster you-know-what of different styles of games to me, so I left it at that, and would cringe at the mere mention of Shadows. However, it's been about 17 years since I first played this game. I've gotten older, and due to the high praise people still give this game years after its release, I decided that perhaps I really didn't give the game a fair shake the first time. So off to eBay I went, and for a mere $5.36, shipping included, I bought the game to see if perhaps my own narrow-mindedness didn't keep me from enjoying a really good game. Shadow starts out in the Hoth battle scene, with your character flying a snow speeder and taking on Imperial probe droids, AT-STs, and even the giant AT-ATs in waves. The scene's not that bad, but having played the Hoth scene about 1,000,000 times since in other Star Wars games, it's not as thrilling today as it would have been when you first played it. It was one of the first, if not the first 3D Star Wars games to allow players to play that scene, and I'm sure it would have been more thrilling in 1996 as opposed to today. After Hoth, the game then moves into third-person shooter, and that's the mode that I found it to be the most enjoyable in. In all honesty, I'm not the type of gamer who likes a lot of blending of genres. I don't need the cliché rail shooter or vehicle scenes in my shooters. I just want a shooter. But on that note, having played newer games that have done similar things, Shadows didn't quite seem like a cluster you-know-what that it used to. If anything, it was a little ahead of its time in that regard, because every shooter nowadays has some sort of similar scene. Shadows has the spaceflight levels that are similar to games like Rogue Squadron, which did it way better, rail shooter scenes, and even one very hard to control speeder bike scene. Some may argue that such scenes add variety to the game, but I'd have to disagree. To me, these scenes always take you away from the real action, and I feel like they're forced upon you because the developer ran out of ideas. The scenes aren't bad, except for the speeder bike scene, which I thoroughly disliked. They're just not the portion of the game that I want to play. They do add variety and break up the action scenes, but to me they distract from the best parts of the game. It's not that these scenes are terrible. They're just unspectacular when compared to full games in a comparable genre. They're okay, but they didn't define the experience for me like the on-foot levels did. The on-foot levels make up 6 of the game's 10 levels, and they're really the best parts of the game. Though the gameplay is your typical shoot-everything shooter, the large-scale levels have a nice variety to them that keep the game from seeming too repetitive. They also house many secret areas to find, rewarding exploration. The objectives still mostly come down to kill stuff, flip a switch to open a door, and maybe do some platform jumping along the way. There are some levels, like the train portion of the junkyard that forces you to jump from moving train to moving train and dodge high and low bridges, that throw out that formula and give the game some much needed variety. There are even a few times where you'll have to use your brain to solve a puzzle or two. However, the majority of the game is still just a straightforward, repetitious shooter. There's nothing wrong with repetition, however. Sometimes you just want something simple but fun, and that's where I found this game to be the most enjoyable. It's just basic fun, and there's nothing wrong with that. Make it through each of the game's large and action-packed on-foot levels, and you'll be greeted with a boss fight. Each boss requires their own strategy to defeat. This also adds some more variety and strategic gameplay to the game. There are also a number of hidden challenge points in the game that you must find, the full collection of which gives you a secret ending, and 3 difficulty levels that add some replay value to the game. Though I found the game to be enjoyable, it's far from perfect. There are many flaws in the game that hold it back. First and foremost are the controls. Shadows has a similar control scheme to Tomb Raider, where pressing up and down on the N64's analog stick moves your character forward and backwards, while pressing left or right turns your character left or right, as opposed to having them walk left or right. This control scheme works just fine for Tomb Raider because of one small detail. Tomb Raider uses the D-pad for movement, and it works perfectly for that control scheme. Shadows, however, does not allow you to control dash with the D-pad, so instead you're stuck using the N64's analog stick to move. This means that you'll constantly be overcorrecting in the game, and it makes landing many of the jumps in the game a lot harder than it needs to be. Some of the overcorrecting issues can be sorted out by efficiently using the strafe button. But another thing that makes controlling and jumping hard is the fact that the game is very floaty. In fact, Dash could even show Master Chief a thing or two about floaty jumping. It's like every planet he visits is one with low gravity. This also complicates in-game jumping. The ship controls in the space flight scenes also feels a little loose, leading to overcorrection in those scenes as well, which can lead to deaths by hitting walls in tight quarters. The controls aren't the only issue I have with the game. The auto-aim is very much hit or miss. In fact, sometimes it's more miss than hit. At times you'll have a hard time getting Dash to hit an enemy standing right in front of him. The enemies, however, don't share this same weakness, especially the many turrets that pop out of the walls. The enemies have dead-on accuracy even on easy. This can lead to a lot of frustrating deaths on account of you constantly taking fire from all sides. This is made more frustrating on the harder difficulty levels, where they take off a lot more damage. Graphically, this first-generation Nintendo 64 game looks quite dated, even by N64 standards. Our old N64 pal, Fog, is out in force, as is his cousin Blur. Is it any wonder why so many people used to get motion sickness from early N64 games? The frame rate seems to be fairly solid aside from the floaty feel of the game. There are also multiple camera angles in each mode of play. You can play the game from first-person view or third-person view. There's even a completely useless cinematic camera angle system that has no practical in-game use whatsoever. Shadow's sound effects and music are top-notch. From the blaster fire to the epic true-to-the-movie symphonic themes played in each level. The game delivers the goods that help add to the authentic Star Wars feel of the game. The bottom line here is, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire is a second-chance game that I actually ended up enjoying this time despite its flaws. That being said, those flaws will drive away anyone except for hardcore Star Wars fans and nostalgic N64 gamers. I understand that Star Wars has a vast universe, but the game really did try to be too much. The Jack of all trades is truly a master of none, and the only thing Shadows masters is how to be average. Not terrible by any means, but certainly not a game that I would consider a classic. It's enjoyably flawed. Those who have no nostalgic attachment to Shadows of the Empire, or people who are new to Nintendo 64 collecting, who are looking for a quality third-person shooter with a strong sci-fi influence, would be better off with Force Gemini. Those looking for a good spaceflight game on the N64 should definitely look into Star Wars Rogue Squadron. And if you're looking for a competent Star Wars racing game, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer.